A very good morning to you all, our viewers. Welcome to yet another edition of The Other Perspective. This is a space where we interrogate the thing behind the thing behind the thing. So, my name is Annette Chiravo. I'll be your host for today's show. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, I would like to encourage you to do so, um, as well as our other social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For today's show, our topic is understanding the growing cost of democracy on taxpayers. And just to give us a brief background, um, recently in the papers, we had a release where uh, it was revealed that the Electoral Commission report um, highlighted that the number of politically elected leaders has increased from over 1.3 million in 2016 to over 1.6 million in 2021. Uganda's Electoral Commission also spent over 419 billion shillings in 2016 in organizing 2016 general elections. And subsequently, in 2021, we see that that number grew to a tune of 698, wow, 0.6 billion in 2021 for organizing general elections. So we see that over time, in different years, we see that the cost of democracy has gradually been increasing. We also see that the number of MPs growing gradually. It has increased, as well as the number of districts. Specifically with MPs, we see that in 2010, in the year 2010, 2011, we had 375 MPs, and then 2016 we had 427 MPs, and we see that number skyrocketing to over 529 MPs. What does this mean to our democracy in this country? And today's show, with me on set, I have three gallant hosts, and I'll introduce them. First, I'll introduce Mr. Henry Muguzi. Henry Muguzi is an electoral democracy expert with a wealth of knowledge and information in this area. We also have Mr. Eddie Kainda. He's an economist as well as a researcher. He'll also be joining us shortly. And we have a youthful young man who's very knowledgeable as well. He's a political scientist and a researcher. His name is Abel Eser. You're very welcome, gentlemen, on the show. I'm happy to see you.
Thank you, Annette. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So with that brief background we've had, and with the topic that we have, let's delve right into our discussion for the day. So I think I'll start with you, Henry. I would like you to give us a synopsis of the cost centers for democracy in Uganda, as you have seen it evolve over the years. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Annette, and of course to our viewers who are listening, joining us from wherever you are in different parts of Africa, but also Europe and the US. It's always an honor for us to be sharing our insights with you. Now, it was an American politician, Jesse Unruh, who said at one time that money is the mother's milk of politics. Without money, we cannot conduct any activity that constitutes democracy. And therefore, money is needed for democracy. Unfortunately, democracy is not cheap. Democracy is costly. And the reason democracy is costly is that it is an aggregate of quite a number of activities. And allow me to take you through some of these. So for starters, there is something we call an election cycle. The election cycle constitutes of a number of activities. And some of these, as you know, include the legal framework. To go into an election, there are times when you have to either amend, create, or review the legal framework. So these are costly because there are allowances that legislators need. There is a process of consultation and so many other things that go into the legal framework. From there, then you go into the whole process of planning and implementing. The people that are going to conduct the election have to go and spend time planning. This is all money, training and educating voters on what to do, and educating also polling agents and the assistants, polling assistants. What about the registration of voters? That process, as you remember, is quite costly because it has to be countrywide. You have to remunerate the men and women that manage this process. What about the nomination as well? A nomination includes if it is presidential. Remember when we nominate, when a presidential candidate is nominated duly, they receive a vehicle an escort van on which there is a police officers. These are all costs. Campaign coordination. To coordinate campaigns across the country, this is money. You understand? And then there is voting operation on election day, including the printing of ballot papers, which we do in European countries. These are all very costly. The verification of results, the post-election period, which is another part of the electoral cycle, where, of course, as you would expect, there will be petitions and taxpayers have to fund these petitions. Petitions will require that the judiciary, the courts, take a fair share of the national budget in order for them to be able to hear and adjudicate these cases. But also the electoral commission and the attorney general have to, and other teams of lawyers have to be hired to represent government. But that said, there are and allowances that we pay the people, that the men and women who have been elected into positions of political positions, all the way from the president to the MPs to the district councillors, sub-county councillors, the LC1 chairperson, and so on. All these people take quite a number or a lot of money. Now, the ministers, you see, when the president is elected, he does not govern alone. He governs with a team of ministers. How many do we have now? 86. All these must have vehicles, must have allowances, must have lead car, must have escort car. These are very expensive undertakings. And then you look at the whole notion of the advisors of the president. Because you have voted the president in office, he needs advisors. I think now the number is coming to 350. I think 300 there. But also there is the whole notion of funding political parties. You remember, political parties that are represented in parliament receive a share of the national cake. The money that goes into those parties. All these costs are levy and impose a burden on the taxpayer. Now, when you look around the number of districts, the number of the size of parliament, and so many others, you get to see that actually the costs are enormous, and these have been rising. If you see the graphic there, we are reminded that, for example, in 2011, we had 112 districts. In 2016, that number grew to 135. But in 2000, and as we speak now, we have 145 districts. This means that you have more MPs coming to parliament, because every time you create a district, that's a woman MP, that's blah, blah, blah. This means you have more districts that have district chairpersons and district councils that must receive remuneration, but it also must be facilitated. But then also, the more districts you have, the more you're going to have to spend in terms of the local government transfers. All these, because districts are a creature, an offshoot of democracy. And therefore, there are quite a number of things. So the aggregate of all these constitute a figure that when you look at it, it becomes really a burden to the taxpayer. I was looking at the budget, Annette. In 2000 and 20 for financial year 2020 to 21, when we had the election, the electoral commission had budgeted for about 1 trillion shillings. I think that money was brought down to 849 billion, and in the end, the ministry was only able to raise 768 billion. And this money was shared between the Ministry of Internal Affairs. I think the money that went into ensuring the security, or can we flip it and say securitizing the campaigns, the money that went into the Electoral Commission, there's money that went into the Citizenship and Immigration Control Center. There's money that went into the Uganda Police Force. There's money that went into the Uganda Prison Service. There's money that went into the National Identification and Registration Authority. And then there's money that went into the Department of Government Analytical Laboratory. So all in all, you see that the Electoral Commission took the lion's share of about 657, and the rest of this money was shared. So all those institutions that have been sharing, listing some of those institutions that many our viewers did not know get to have a share of what has been allocated for election. And then for democracy, then it becomes quite a big toll on the taxpayer. Back to you, Anne.
Wow, those are really quite insightful things to bring in here. Eddie, would you jump in here from your economics perspective? What price does the taxpayer have to pay for this growing cost of democracy?
Thank you, Annette, for your invitation to this discussion. Henry makes an elaborate discussion of what it takes to host an electoral process in Uganda, or financing politics in Uganda in terms of cost. But the addition I can make onto that is that yes, we can see all this money is coming into politics and costing highly to deliver democracy in Uganda and Africa in general. But where does the money come from? In the African democracy perspective, and probably globally, we have various financing options for democracy, including the taxpayers' money. Henry mentions that government there has to substantially finance political parties, the electoral management bodies, among others, in ensuring that democracy processes can take place. But also, we also know that in the Ugandan context, we have a lot of grants and donations from bilateral development partners, because one of the conditions that upon to which we must be supported as an emerging economy, as a developing economy, is that we must demonstrate that we are democratic. Therefore, they have a very big share of monies they have to put in terms of promoting democracy. You have seen the World Bank, you have seen the International Finance Corporation, you've seen the USAID and other multilateral development partners investing a lot of money into grants and donations towards democracy. But in some other issues, we also have loans. Loans in cases where we cannot finance our democracy domestically, we know that we have acquired foreign loans, and some of these loans have seen their way into financing some of the cost centers Henry mentions in his preamble. But there is a current development in the Ugandan context where the private sector is coming in handy to finance politics, and these are persons that are interested in benefiting from the political processes, or they want to be on the side of government when a government either wins for an electoral seat or presidential seat, or in local governments, a chairperson is to win an electoral seat. There shall always be those private sector partners that are willing to finance either as proxies into political processes to ensure that they can be on the side of that person when he or she wins an electoral seat. But the interesting development we do have in the Ugandan context, again, is that politicians are financing their own election. You recall in the previous elections that we had in Uganda in 2021, we had lots of independent candidates. They were creating a very significant percentage of the persons that stood for elective positions. and most of these monies were financing from their own savings, from their own properties, from their own loans, among others. So some of these cost centers are financed by the politicians themselves, but also me as a citizen. When I spend money to come from my house to go to a polling station and vote and cast my ballot, I have invested in democracy. I have invested in politics. Therefore, when you're looking at the cost centers of politics in Uganda or in Africa as a whole, even globally, it's important that we also look at where does the money come from. And for me, where the money comes from and whether that money makes value on investment in politics is subject to discussion, and it takes a big stake in this discussion we are going to have this morning. Back to you, Annette.
Wow, thank you. Abel, you being a youth, a political scientist, and a researcher, would you give us the news perspective, especially on the same?
Thank you so much, Annette, and thank you, Henry and Eddie, for your submissions. For me, I want to first of all appreciate from the background Henry has given us, where he has discussed a lot about how elections are costly and money is needed in politics. Money is the mother's milk of politics. As you gave us your background, Annette, you hinted that currently the number of political elected leaders has increased from 1,300,000 to 1.6 million in this current year. And we are seeing that a lot of money is being spent in terms of paying for these leaders to do their work. And we currently have a budget that was just passed by Parliament, the 2022-2023 budget. And we are going to see the 529 members of Parliament. They are going to expend on the legislation and oversight representation about 686 billion. 686 billion is going to be used by only Parliament. So that is all going to cost the taxpayers that money. So we should be asking ourselves, is this really relevant? Do we really need to spend all this money on this increasing number of political leaders? And if you look at the administration of justice, for example, we have seen always whenever there are issues on elections, we have always election petitions. And there was a time the permanent secretary of the judiciary, Mr. Pius Bigrimana, alluded that they spent 1.2 billion in only hearing the presidential petition of Honorable Robert Chagulanyi and President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. So if you are spending about 1.2 billion on only adjudicating on election petition or presidential electoral petition, and through our engagements and research with some of the people in the judiciary, they also told us it costs more than 20 million to only adjudicate on one election petition. So all these are costs that taxpayers incur in terms of democracy. So I think we are spending a lot as a country, or in terms of democracy, and I don't know whether we really have there's value for spending a lot on such, because people are still grappling in poverty, and they think they are not being represented very well. Because first of all, if we cumulatively break down these numbers of elected leaders, we have 1.6 million, and we have a population of 44 million Ugandans. That means that each 27, okay, one leader represents about 27 Ugandans. So it's like we are overrepresented. If we have 27 Ugandans being represented by one leader, we should see that there is something being done to address the issues of those citizens. So we don't need to have a very big or bloated political and administrative structure, which costs a lot of money in terms of taking care of them, and at the end, we don't see anything coming in terms of service delivery.
Yes.
That's what I can give for now.
Abel, what do you think explains this growing cost of democracy? As we've mentioned earlier, you see that the numbers are increasing, especially in terms of budgeting and expenditure. For example, we see from 2016 it was at 419 billion. and then come 2021, it grows to 698. What do you think explains this increment? Back to you, Abel.
Okay, one of the things that it explains this increasing number of elective positions and also other structures which we are seeing is the continuous creation of more districts and more electoral positions by the government in power. So we really don't understand because the narrative they always keep giving us is that the more they create more districts and more elective positions, they are trying to take leadership close to the people. But if you have 27 citizens being represented by one leader, but we still don't see any change in terms of improvement of service delivery, do we really need to continue creating more districts if even those very districts are not being financed? The cities we have created, right now, they don't have money to run them effectively. They are still relying on their mother districts. So do we need to create more districts, more elective positions, just to and when which costs us a lot of money in terms of putting the leaders in who are supposed to politically manage those areas in power, but we don't allocate money when it comes to money that is needed for running those very administrative units. So the continuous creation of districts and administrative units is one of the reasons why we are seeing that the number is skyrocketing. But we should also not rule out that politics is right now one of the one of the biggest earner of in Uganda. So most people put a lot of pressure to some of the leaders we have to create for them uh, positions. It can be politically or even administrative. For example, RDCs. Some of the people we see who lose are created for positions and they end up being RDCs. So all these costs are still incurred on the taxpayers because you find that someone has gone maybe for an election, he has lost, and they're so loyal to maybe the leaders in power, so they need to be put somewhere. So they end up creating some positions for them, and the taxpayers has all that burden to make sure that the that is created has all the resources that needs for that is needed for that office to operate functionally. So we end up financing a lot of things which do not really translate into improving on the livelihood of Ugandans, but we are only financing things which are benefiting a few individuals.
Hmm. All right. Thank you very much. Henry, Abel has alluded to the fact that Ugandans, we seem to be overrepresented, where he says that the number of elected leaders today is over 1.6 million, which implies that every leader represents 27 Ugandans or citizens, rather. I would like to know your take. Do you think that we need all these leaders, especially given the fact that we don't seem to see that their representation translates into what they are supposed to do in terms of mandate and responsibility? Over to you, Henry.
Thank you very much, Annette. Quite an interesting question it is. Now, for us as political scientists, we know that studies have been conducted almost on every sphere of politics. But there has not been one study that has proved or established that there is a correlation between overrepresentation, or if you will, representation and the service delivery. The argument that has always been propagated by the people in power in the NRM government has always been that, look, we give you a district because then you get more services. Experience has proved the contrary. Now, so then you ask yourself the question, if creation of new districts, or if you like, districtization of democracy in Uganda, if it has not resulted into improvement in service delivery, then whose interest is it serving? And the answer is simple. Because if you look around the districts that are being created, first of all, they are too weak economically, they cannot raise the internal revenue, they have to depend on central government transfers. And by depending on central government transfers, they become perpetually beholden to the center, and therefore these have only served as instruments of patronage. It's part of the expanded patronage network, and therefore I agree with Abel that it is used. It has proven to be of no consequence. In fact, if we were to give any advice to government or to whoever will come into government, whenever that happens, one would propose that first of all we take the number of districts back to 100, and that it is enough for every district to have 2 representatives, 1 woman and 1 man, one male, 1 female, so that you have a parliament that has a maximum of 200 legislators. This is how we are going to have quality, because you see the decision on whether a road gets to be constructed the decision on whether the road from Konakamudini to Lira gets to be repaired or not does not require that the entire whole sub-region of Bolango has 60 MPs. 1 person, or at most 2, can be enough to present the issue on the floor of Parliament, so that the burden on the taxpayer can be reduced. And therefore, I don't agree that creation of districts improves services, and I'm also of the view, therefore, that we need to work towards reducing these numbers, because the burden, the public administration burden of Uganda is too big. Now, if you look at the national budget, most of the money we pump into local governments, I was doing research, about 8, close to 80% of the funds we send to local governments are spent on payment of salaries of these of civil servants, and we leave a paltry less than 20% to finance the capital expenditure. This is wrong. You cannot take a country to middle income status when you are investing only less than 20% into capital expenditure and spending 80% on recurrent expenditure. This should change, and therefore I think there are quite a number of things. I was also checking here the numbers. I spoke earlier about the taxpayers' money that we pump into political parties as public funding. This financial year, the Electoral Commission has already received 45 billion that is going to go into the political parties represented in the Parliament, and these are for the benefit of those that don't have them on their fingertips. We have NRM that enjoys a lion's share of the numbers. We have the FDC, we have NUP. Those are 3. Number 4, we have DP, UPC, we have JEMA and PPP. There are about 6 political parties in Parliament. But of course, the formula that is going to be used is that of numerical strength. You would expect that the lion's share of the 45 billion is going to go to the party in power. And therefore, even when the idea was to kind of regurgitate and capacitate political parties, you'll find that political parties like PPP and JEMA, which have 1 legislator each, are going to get only bread crumbs. Therefore, the meaning of public funding to political parties reduces consequence, because the party that is in power, that has access to everything, including being the favorite one that receives all the monies from all the campaign financiers, is still the same party that is getting the biggest chunk of the public funding to political parties. These are leaving a burden on the taxpayer and making democracy so costly, something that I think should have been avoided. Back to you, Annette.
Wow, interesting discussion here. Once again, our viewers, discussion for today, we are trying to understand the growing cost of democracy on the taxpayer in Uganda. Let's go for a brief break. We shall be right back after the break.